this is the Hunter College New York City Food Policy Center, and this is our Food Policy for Breakfast series, which has been going on for a number of years. Even during the pandemic, while it went virtual, we still held it, but it's great to be back in person. And today's panel, 2 panels actually, we're going to be addressing the topic of strategies for sustained nutrition and culinary education. The first panel is going to address programs and practitioners, which is really fun, and another, which can be a little bit drier, which I'm going to be leading, is the policy side of all that, and how we reach sustainability through policy. Pam Koch is going to be leading the first panel, and I'll let you take it, Pam, and you guys can come up.
I am so happy to be here and delighted to be having this panel on this such an important topic. How many of you, sometime in the last year, have worked with a child related to food and education about food, whether that was through school meals or a classroom or anything? Raise your hand. All right. And those of you who haven't raised your hand, I hope that you will be doing that sometime soon, and because it is so incredibly important. So I'm going to get us started by just reading a little something that's going to frame what it is that we're going to be doing today. Children spend about 12,000 hours, so that's about 1,000 hours a year, in school between kindergarten and 12th grade. That makes it an ideal place for food and nutrition education, especially experiences that involve cooking. And cooking is one of our focuses that we have today. We are fortunate to have representatives from 3 incredible nonprofits and 3 incredible women who have done so much here today. We have Corbin Hill Food Project, Family Cook Production, and Wellness in the Schools. They work with school students during their school days to improve diet and through culinary education that inspires students and makes them feel confident that they can enjoy food that will nourish them. So how do we make this happen in schools? How do we evaluate this? How do we ensure sustainability, especially in our low-resource communities? How can we make healthy eating a priority when families may not even have gas or electricity or health insurance? And why isn't food and nutrition education part of the core curriculum in every school across the city every single school year? What are the biggest obstacles? Time, money, egos, space, something else? In New York City, it may be hard for children to have space in their lives for things like gardening and growing food and cooking. So how do we assure that they have that in school and they get exposures to gardens as well as being able to cook in kitchen classrooms or wherever they can cook in schools? What happens when we get kids hooked on nutritious food, but they go home to families that don't have the means? They may not have access to supermarkets, and we know that's true in many places across our city, or equipment, like even burners and pots and pans, to replicate the recipes that they make in school. Can we empower our children to become the intergenerational change agents to really make these changes? And what would that look like if we really did that? Does linking nutrition and culinary education programs to community activities shows promise as a way of improving a child's likelihood of succeeding and getting their family to eat healthier? Any parent who has gone to the grocery store with a child knows that children who are bombarded with marketers' messages nag unrelentingly for advertised items. How do we use the same incredible power of that nag factor to focus on nutritious foods? What if we could apply that nag factor to healthy foods? So children exposed to things like kale or cabbage or anything else in their school kitchen go home and nag their parents and caregivers for vegetables. I know I used to be part of a program called Art and Healthy Living that was run through the organization Studio in a School, and the kids did art and did a lot about vegetables, and they would have an art fair at the end, and every single time parents would say, I came today because I wanted to know what it was that got my kids asking for vegetables in the vegetable aisle. And I know a lot of you have had that experience too. So now we're on to our panelists. And I would like each of you to take about 2 minutes to tell us about your approach to culinary education and what you have done to frame your work with New York City public school children. And we'll start with Marion Williams from Wellness in the Schools.
Good morning. Thank you, Pam. That was very inspirational and exciting. For me, as the National Program Director for Wellness in the Schools, which we're excited that we are national because this work doesn't just stop in New York, the culinary program has to start with the children, then their community. And so what we do in Wellness in the Schools is we approach our children in the classroom through our cooking labs, through our WITS Bits. We do it through the WITS Cafe, which is meeting the children in the cafeteria, which is their socialization time. We love to meet them there and teach them how to try something new right in the place where they will be eating. We go into the kitchen and work with the essential worker, and we make sure that they're supported in their own health, in addition to giving them resources for them to now make the food and make it not just nutritious, but it has to be attractive. It has to be relatable. And that's also what our labs do. We actually cook the food in the classroom, and then they see it down on the school line. And there's the familiarity. To your point, we get many parents that say, what is in the salad that you're giving the children? That my child says, oh, I only eat salad at school. And, it's exciting to hear children say that. But in fact, it's very, very simple ingredients, and simple ingredients that their palate can understand. We don't try to complicate things, but we do bring cultural relevance to them also. So that's what if I had to say what we do, that's one of the things we do.
Thank you so much. And some of you who may be familiar with what I've done for a long time is I believe that school meals are the core of what kids learn about food in schools. And therefore, when we make the school meal experience the absolute best it can be with great foods, as well as a great atmosphere that does feel fun and social and also really conducive to eating, that's every single solitary day. So it makes a big difference. So thank you.
Thank you.
And let's go to Yadira Garcia from Corbin Hill Food Project, as well as many other organizations. So tell us about what you do.
Is this on? Oh, hi. Hi, good morning, everybody. So I'm affectionately known as Chef Yadi in the community, and I'm currently working with Corbin Hill Food Project, which is a nonprofit based in Harlem that works at the intersection of food sovereignty, food policy, and food access for our schools and community members. Because it's really important to not just work on the programming, as many of us here are all involved, and you'll talk about more on your second panel, but the policy and advocacy happening concurrently is so important because of the amount of time that we get to actually spend with children, giving them this nutrition education, which is often happening like on the periphery, and it's always a fight to get it inculcated into the curriculum, or what do teachers' PDs look like, right? So that so it's technical training also. There's a lot of non-sexy work happening here to get the front of the scenes going. And I really come at this work being a product of public schools, right? So I went to public schools my entire life. I'm a girl from the Bronx, and that's what really got me involved in this work, wanting to be part of the change that I want to see, but also growing up in what I call the SAD diet, which is the standard American but Dominican diet too, because I come from a Caribbean family, and so I had this intergenerational experience at home where I had my great-grandmother and my grandmother and my mom under one roof until I was 16. So there was definitely a lot of like scratch cooking going on at home, which I didn't appreciate till I got much older. But then in schools and outside, I was having McDonald's and KFC. That's what was in my neighborhoods. And school lunches were looking pretty sad and not colorful in those days. So I see some head nodding and some yes. We know what that life is about, and not a lot of, as we call, sazon or flavor going on. So a lot of times healthy food can has been associated to like maybe flavorless food, right? Or non-colorful food. So for me, wanting to preserve ancestral knowledge, because it's really important that we keep, not a lot of kids do get to grow up in intergenerational homes nowadays, right? So by the time I was 16, my grandmother and great-grandmother had passed away, but I have this plethora of like recipes and food, good food memories with them. And a lot of what's stuck is the joy, right? And the memories that we create. And I think a lot of times being able to infuse that, like Marion was saying, cultural relevancy, we want to be seen in our foods and in our meals. We don't want our cultural foods to be demonized. Every culture has like a rice dish. Every culture has like a rolled food, right? And so bringing that like ancestral history into the school spaces and making kids feel seen, like, yes, your rice and beans are healthy. Yes, we do eat veggies because sofrito has a bunch of chopped up vegetables and herbs in it, right? So it may not be in like a kale salad or in a smoothie, but we have this richness accessible in our cultures. And I think that kids want to be seen. You don't want to like demonize certain behaviors. And so although I'm a chef and I'm a nutrition educator, I really come at it as that like Bronx school kid and like what I would have wanted to see, the inclusivity, the diversity, the representation, and also it's really important. We were discussing and prepping for this panel. Sometimes it takes a kid, 10 times to try a food before they actually like it. And it can be really cost prohibitive for some families to do that at home. But the frequent introduction, not just on the plate, but like having a garden space. Even you'd be hard pressed to see a kid see a tomato grow or pick it and not try it, right? Taste test something. So I think always tying back to not just our food and our cultural relevancy, but where our food comes from. So it's not just this like homogenized thing that shows up on your plate, like try this random thing. When a kid has experience touching a seed, going to a garden, hearing a family story, then cooking with it and seeing it on their plate, there's these really pivotal touch points. And I think for me, that's something that I try to bring in all of the programs that I create, is these multi-pronged touch points where you may not get them in this one space, but whoever's gonna need the message is gonna get it at the point where it's gonna connect with them emotionally.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I think the themes there were joy and connection. And I used to do a professional development class for educators, and about 800 teachers took it. But the point that I want to make is the first thing I had them do is say, what's your own relationship with food? And if we think of teachers as representing the adults in the United States, it's sobering because most of them felt like they had a fraught relationship with eating and food. And that joy and that connection can help today's children to become adults that love eating, love connecting to their foods. And that brings us to Lynn Fredericks from Family Cook Productions, who has done so much of that.
Yes, you don't have a mic there? Okay.
Thank you. I'm so glad you're all underscoring joy, because that's what actually brought me to this work. I was not having a lot of joy almost 30 years ago when I went through a divorce, unfortunately, and I found myself with 2 young little children, and I was a food and wine writer and a recipe developer and a consultant, and I would send my children out of the room when I was cooking dinner and say, go, watch something, do something, and be very unhappy in the kitchen. And then, of course, the littlest one is coming in. He's almost 2, and he's hanging on me, and that was making me crazy. So lifting him up and telling him, I have a job for you. Honestly, I didn't know what I was going to give him to do, but I gave him something with, herbs or whatever. But he was so quiet. And having that experience of finding a way to connect with my children, have some fun in the kitchen. Of course, I got the older brother involved, and it changed everything for me, for us, and it brought me to bring this work to schools. I mean, this is a very long time ago. And slowly it grew. I really brought it there more for bringing more joy to learning and making learning come alive through food. But of course, the nutritional part was happening in my family too. The kids were eating new things. I could not believe what they were eating. So we developed programs for all different ages. We started out elementary, and it was preschool and high school. And then we started disseminating them around the country. And the connecting around the joy, I would say, couple things about our approach. Definitely, Pam and I worked on some research together to look at what drives behavior change in these teaching kitchen type of education in schools. And definitely joy, having a sense of success, and being challenged a little bit, right? Being challenged in your palate are the overarching things. I won't tell you what all these drivers are, but it was really important to me to bring that, 20 years at that point experience with Pam and do some research and be able to publish that to share with people, because a lot of times people just think, do a great recipe, they think it's kid friendly, and serve it out there. And it takes so much more than that, right? To make this learning stick, to make children feel like, included, seen, heard, and also that they're having some fun. We want positive references for every single time a children is in a food education environment. We want them to feel like, oh, I want to do that again, right? So that's been really important to us. And also because we disseminate around the country, similar to WITS, we have to evaluate. So I know we'll get into that conversation too.
We will, thank you. And I just want to share, so we have about 25 minutes left, and so for all the panelists, I'm going to start asking you questions. And if I bring my mic up to my mouth, that means wrap it up, just so we make sure we have time for all of our questions. But I just have to share a really, really quick story. Some of you may be familiar with the program Cook Shop that was started by Tony LaCorey when it was then Community Food Resource Center, went to Food Change, and then to the Food Bank, where it still now is. And I was really lucky enough to get to work on that in the early days, about 30 years ago. And basically, Tony LaCorey's daughter is now a school principal. And when she was an assistant principal in a middle school, she was having Teens for Food Justice, a great organization in New York City, start a garden. And there were some students helping out with it. And they had gone to all different elementary schools, just like what happens in New York City. And as they were starting the garden, they all started to talk about that they had Cook Shop in elementary school and how much they loved it and the joy that they got from getting to cook in their classroom. And Amy, Tony's daughter, was overhearing this and said, you all had that program. My mom started that program. And it just shows that these experiences, that when you get to garden and cook and even explore food justice in your community and realize that you can advocate for positive change, those are the memories that kids are going to take with them from school. So it's really meaningful work that all of you are doing. So Miriam, we're going to start with you. WITS has been around for nearly 2 decades. Nancy Easton is here with us in the audience and started in one school in Manhattan. And now your program has extended in New York City, obviously beyond New York City, to every school building across the 5 boroughs. What has that journey been like? What challenges and opportunities can you identify with doing this food nutrition education and helping it to be sustained?
Well, thank you, Pam. I just want to start with a quote from Nancy Easton. And the Food Inc. book, too, is coming out. The movie is coming out at the end of the month, and we are going to be at the premiere. But I just want to start here because I think this will help frame the answer I'm going to give. At first, I wasn't exactly sure what I would do, but I started with what I knew. I knew schools. I deeply believe that schools have the power to transform not only a child, but a system. I think the important part of what that quote says is that we have to find a place to actually put your program. And our program does go farther outside of a school, but it does start in the school. We have to start where learning begins. And I think that our children, when we look at the opportunities that we've gotten being able to expand throughout New York City, it's an opportunity to touch every child. It's our opportunity to speak to every educator that is trying to teach those children. It's an opportunity to get into the kitchens, which we've had through our SITS program, our Chefs in School program, having to hire 70 chefs to go throughout New York City schools, being one of the largest school districts in the United States. That was a little bit of a challenge for us. It was, trying to find like-minded people. Everyone has great intentions, but could they really stick it out and spend the time after 20 years of Nancy looking for the right place to actually put us? I've been with Wellness in School for 14 years at this point, and to your point, Pam, a story just recently happened to me. It's surprising even now. Every time I encounter a student, I worked in the Morris High School farm with the students every summer, and I ran into a student last summer in 12th grade, and he was like, "I know you. I don't know where I know you from, but I really know you, and I just can't figure it out." He volunteered to work in the summer in that garden. In that garden, we've been there for the last 6 or 7 years working with them and Grow NYC. And after a while, he said, "Oh, I know what it is. You taught me how to make potatoes in the 4th grade." And I'm just so like, it was just one of those things where, besides the fact that maybe I don't look that different, I was excited about that. It said he was from 4th grade, he's in 11th grade. I was excited about that, but just the fact that as I thought about it, what brought these high school students here in the South Bronx to this garden to work in the summer, which is not a popular time to be working, and then having that memory of learning how to make potatoes, it just, I can't even tell you what that feels like. And it helps to fuel us on a regular basis. And it's the kind of thing that we've taught and have expressed to our new chefs, because it is difficult every day. That is one of the larger challenges that we have, to inspire them to continue in a system that's sometimes a little difficult. It's difficult for the people that work in the system. It's a system we're trying to change that's been set for so many years. But there's so much opportunity today. We have the opportunity to be here with you, to speak to you about what we do. And you can speak to others about what we're doing. So I'm excited about all the opportunities we get. It doesn't matter whether it's a packed house or not. Every one of you are an opportunity to tell this story about what's happening. And we're excited, and Wellness in the Schools have stuck in there for 20 years to now see this is our time.
And again, it goes back to the joy and the connection.
Exactly.
And by the way, there is a lot of research with food and nutrition education programs that has shown that on the days when children know that they get to garden or cook, that attendance is higher and discipline issues are lower. And
That's
so
exactly
it shows how much the students connect with these experiences. So Lynn, you are really expanding your early childhood program, Nibble with Willow, which you can tell us about, in New York City schools, and providing professional development to teachers. Tell us a bit about this expansion, and also discuss how you are engaging school leadership and how you are assuring that the program with the teachers teaching it is being fully implemented.
Sure. So we have so much experience in doing any kind of dissemination, right? Since 2002 or 2003. So we have really been able to approach this thanks to the mayor's funding, right, for food education, and the whole idea for, choosing schools and being able to provide all the things that Pam just said, really cruxes first in listening to what the Department of Education's early childhood team really needed, right? What kinds of schools were they interested? They needed to know more about our program. What does it require of teachers? So we came up with, I won't give you all the criteria and all the details, but we came up with a system that I was so pleased worked really well, because we offered many schools an opportunity. Like, they sent it out to all the early childhood. We got information back, and then we invited the ones that we had 100 schools interested that offered 3K and pre-K, and then we offered an opportunity for them to come to an orientation, they understand more, and then we gave them probably some of the things that you guys have to talk to about. What does this really mean for your school? And we put that in an actual contract that the principal had to sign. So it couldn't just be an eager beaver teacher, right? Because they're going to want to do it, but then how can you ensure that their principal is going to give them the everything that they need, the support and many things, permissions, a million things, to be able to do that program. And Nibble with Willow is part of the school day and part of a school meal time. So it's either snack, lunch, or afternoon snack, so morning snack. And so, that had to be, the principals really had to buy in. And one of the things we asked in our material, the survey, was, why do you want to do this? And so who do you think we picked? We picked the schools that signed that agreement that said, we believe in this power of food, in how important we want our children to be prepared to learn, to understand and be able to make a healthy food choice. So to get to the fidelity, so, for all of our programs, when we're disseminating even around the country, we have people go in that are trained with what we call fidelity checklist, and it goes through all the components of a lesson to see if it's there. Now, people are not being judged on how well they're teaching. They're being judged, or not judged, but we're assessing, are they following the curriculum? Do they do something that's different? We're making notes. Maybe they bring some amazing element that we never thought of that we want to attribute. That has happened, and then we attribute it in the next round of the curriculum to that school or to that teacher. So it's a living, breathing program, right? You can't have one thing that never expands or never develops as all of us are developing and as society is developing. You have to keep it fresh. So that's how we are able to assess that. But, to the credit of these last 10 schools that we had 3 or 4 classrooms in this last few months, they had we had a 1 to 5 scale. They averaged 4.5 on that scale of fidelity. These preschool teachers, well, Jeremy was there with me in one of the schools, and I haven't been able to visit that many, but my team has, and they're extraordinary. They take good material, and then they just make it come alive for the children. So the children are meeting a little bunny. So that's what Willow is, and that's why they're nibbling. It's a little bunny, and the bunny is a hand puppet, and the bunny takes them through a whole experience around food with a rhyme and a story or a song. And then they go into exploring with a magnifying glass, what is this food that we're going to have today? So now they've gone through so many barriers of, oh, what is that? And, oh, it looks strange and all of that. They've inspected it. They've used their vocabulary to describe it. And then they go to the table and they're able to manipulate and make something, 3-year-old cutting up and tasting. And believe me, so this is weekly. Believe me, the first week of the new food, do you think everybody's swallowing it? No. They take a bunny bite. They say 1, 2, 3, nibble, and everybody takes a bunny bite. A lot of spitting out. By the 4th week, they are asking for seconds. They're looking more. Is there more in that bowl? It's amazing. And we always use multiple vegetables because I just can't take up that time and teach one thing. I've got to have a few things in there, not too many.
That is so great. And I want to say that with food education, obviously everything needs to be developmentally appropriate. The best thing you can do with really young children is those hands-on experiences with food to get them to eat it. That's always important, right? It's still important in adulthood, especially if you're trying something new. So that never goes away. And when children have that young, then you can layer onto it, thinking about the other issues, thinking about how things affect our health, how it affects our planet, why there are injustices, what are the systemic reasons for injustices of food across our communities, how can we all become advocates for change? And that builds on those really early experiences. So it's so exciting that more and more kids are getting that.
And I should just add one last thing is that it's not enough that classroom is a success, right? Because children are gobbling down amazing foods every week. Well, what about what's going at home? They have no agency to decide what's on that table for dinner. So there's a whole component of our program, a lot, that connects to parents and invites parents in and connects to parents, including text messages that go home, so that the parents are being reminded constantly that this is something that their children are exploring and becoming to accept, and keep that conversation going. And then parents are very excited because what became, like for me, right, a tension point, that mealtime, turns into something that you're learning and discovering together. And that's quite a beautiful thing.
Thank you. Yadi, can you speak about the Corbin Hill Direct New York State Farmer model that is built into your work?
Yes. And I just want to say very quickly how important it is that we have these spaces and just like what like Tisch is doing with the Food Ed Hub, that the practices that we're sharing out today, that we're able as organizations to share out best practices, because at the end of the day, we all have the same goal, right? Like I believe that a kid in the South Bronx, in East New York, deserves the same access to quality food and nutrition education that a kid in a very well-funded school district like in the Upper West Side might get, right? And so in a lot of these NEP programs, it has had to be, schools raising money individually to be able to bring them in. So when we have coalition work, right, when we stand on the shoulders of giants like Lynn and Nancy that have championed this work relentlessly, that it's really important as the next generation, right, just like our farmers are aging out, as we engage in this work and as we continue to build this work, that we have these spaces where we can push together, and leverage the platform that we can create and collective impact and power, which leads me right into like the talk with New York State farmers, because we have about 57,000 farmers in New York State, but I don't know if we're all aware of how many Black, Indigenous, brown farmers and people of color there are. It's 137 farmers. There's 7 million acres of farmland in New York State. And so this is also tied to procurement, right? Like it matters not just the food that our kids eat, but where that food comes from and who grows that food and who we're supporting. And farming our ancestral and indigenous practices, that a lot of it originated in our Black and brown communities, and being able to support our farmers and making sure that, right, not just like kale and spinach shows up, but I want to see okra and callaloo too, right? And I want to see that on my salad bar, and I want to see that, and I want to see NEPs be able to procure that food and bring it into our communities and schools. Well, it doesn't start at the supermarket, right? It starts with the farmer, and it starts with policy and advocacy and making sure to champion that work. So the same way that there's a lot of policy work happening with nutrition education programs, there's very recent coalitions like the Black Farmer Fund, DIESA, Fidelity, Equity, and Dignity, that's happening around galvanizing communal power and pushing the needle on how food is sourced in New York, what shows up in our schools, what shows up in our farmers markets, what shows up in our supermarkets, what shows up in our bodegas. Just like you should care, right? What shows up in New York schools is also tied to what shows up in hospitals and jails. All of this stuff is connected, right? So we have got to care. We have got to get involved. We have got to be having conversations together. A lot of times when you're doing some of the same work, and part of the systemic separation is making you feel like you're pitted against each other, but we all have the same goal on this stage, in this audience. Yes, 2 claps and 2 snaps up. So just a reminder, right, that we have to be talking to each other. We have got to share. It's been beautiful to see the proliferation of wellness in the schools across every school, right? Where you're going from pitching one school to all of a sudden being able to be district-wide, being able to have a national program. These things happen not overnight, but they happen by getting together and shifting collective power and questioning who holds the power, right? And challenging that continually and consistently, because a lot of times I feel like I felt like a lone wolf in this space, but finding these communal organizations to work together with and push together with is really what keeps you going, because it's also very easy to burn out in this kind of work that we're doing in community. So you have to put some safeguards and some rails in places. So all that to say that the work with farmers for me feels very connected, directly connected to what shows up on a school kid's plate, feels very connected to procurement, feels very connected to policy. And so you find the thread, you weave the thread, right? So a lot of times I feel like I'm pushing these different balls up, but it's because it's all connected, and we consistently have to name who holds the power and challenge that.
Thank you. That was great. Yes. Woo. And I would love, you talked a little bit in your introduction about how important cultural, traditional foods rooted in this education is, as well as then making sure those foods are grown and procured. Talk just a little bit more about that.
Yeah, I think it's just making it connected and part of the ecosystem. It's not separate from like the food that shows up at home or some of the traditions that we grew up with. Marion and I got to speak a little bit about how, growing up, she had like pasta because like an Italian neighbor was cooking a certain food, right? And like making sure that we honor the history. First of all, the inclusivity and the diversity in New York. So I think something we talk about a lot in NEP programs too is English is not the only language that's spoken here, right? So a lot of the ways that I've been able to connect to communities and families where I do work in the school, but I also engage the PTA is because, I'm also speaking in Spanish and I'm also providing those recipes in Spanish and Google Translate is not it, okay? Like it will mess up a lot of words, but having people, again, back to who holds power, when you're creating curriculum, when you're creating programming, it's really important to have people at the table in the space that can really appreciate these cultural nuances or speak about it and infuse it into the work that you're doing. We have one little, are we doing questions? No. Okay.
5 minutes.
Okay, 5 minutes. I was like, what?
Even
No.
less.
Sorry,
So
I
we
could
have-
just
we have
I
two more
could just
questions.
talk about this all day, but it's just really deeply important to lead with in the spaces that I work, there's a lot of RDs as well. And while like proteins and calories and breakdowns of plates are important to a certain thing, that's not what's going to get kids to make a change or taste of food. And it's not just about excluding things, but adding things in. So again, rice and beans or a jollof dish, I might like add an extra vegetable that's seasonal and local and say, hey, like this dish, this jollof still works with some zucchini in it, right? Because zucchini is in season right now. And then there's excitement about it. Oh, like, mommy, I had a jollof today with zucchini in it. Or I had a moro de guandules, with some spinach added to it, right? And so those are a lot of the points of joy that I see. And then a parent might ask me for the recipe. So honoring that is really, really important and leading and infusing with that. And I feel like that's always been part of my success in schools.
Yeah, definitely. So to build right on that, I would love to hear about how you incorporate children when you're developing new recipes, especially recipes that follow culture and tradition, so that they feel connected to it.
So what we do is we have created a chef's council, and our chef's council has brought from the farm all of the culturally relevant recipes that we test with Orphan S Kitchen. And in the test and recipe kitchen, we bring the children, and the children have a space there. They have an opportunity to lend their voice, to speak to the product before it goes on the menu. We have to, push for it to get to be 70% or so in a positive way, and that's a first taste. That is not a 10th taste or a 12th taste. So we do work on the recipes, and we continue to work on it. And we brought this chef's council and challenged them to give us 100 recipes that we could push through, that we could work with the procurement that we currently exist with Old Finesse, based on the budget and based on what we have existing. But we've got things like jollof cauliflower wings, which was one of the big hits this year for our students in the classroom to make and also to see in the cafeteria. So the flavors are there, right? But we're also putting cauliflower on the plate. So it's an excitement. The students get a chance to also vote in the school. They also see now QR codes in the cafeteria for the ones that have devices. They can vote on whether they like something. They can talk a little bit more about it. They have to have agency and ownership. We have changed our salad bars. They're looking more culturally relevant. We're making kale. We're making collard greens. We have a colorful collard green recipe that actually across the country has been a really big one. And so bringing things that they're familiar with for the first taste is where you get children involved. So I think, when they taste something, it may look a little different, but that's Cuban. My grandma mixed that. Oh, that's cilantro. I know what that is. I understand those seasonings. They don't even know why they appreciate it. They don't normally like broccoli or they don't normally like this. But if it tastes the way that they're familiar in their mind, and we always teach children, there's a bean in every culture. So just for the record, we celebrate with it, we mourn with it, and we come together with it. there's always one bean recipe that we celebrate with. So we always let the children get the jokes out about the beans, but then we get right down to the bottom of it, is that, beans are not just something that you see at home. It is something we need to have at school. It's another opportunity for you to have something cleaner and plant-based in your body. I think it's important. Plant-based has gotten a really bad rap. And I think it's because people just think, oh, you're eating dirt. Or for kids, they're just thinking, I don't want to eat green all the time. But it's not about that. It is about feeling good. And they know they feel better when they're eating things that are less processed. And that's the reason why we are pushing scratch cooking wherever we can, and bringing in the farmers and bringing in the BIPOC farmers, which we're doing a lot more, expressing to students. And like I said, seeing my 11th grade, 12th grade student after 4th grade, he's getting his hands in the dirt. He sees it a little bit different from what we thought of what farming was when we grew up. It wasn't that exciting thing. So that's what we're doing with our students. We're giving them agency.
Thank you. I was actually there when they were testing the penne and the sweet potato quesadilla a couple of weeks ago at 2 schools. The kids loved them at both schools I were at. So, Lynn, we're going to have our last question with you to talk about how can we imagine doing more collective impact of all of this work that's happening with food education for our children. Just imagining what we could do.
Oh, this is my dream. It's my dream that so many practitioners doing such brilliant work that we would be able to see evidence, some maybe, not just quotes from people, but actual, objective evidence that on a few points that things are changing in terms of children's not just attitudes, but actually what choices they're making. And also if any of that, because they're more open, is extending into households. And so I don't know exactly how we would do this, but I'm fortunate enough this year to have a very substantial grant for the next few years from the Robin Hood Foundation. And one of the things that they want to do and we want to do is, so this is for early childhood, is to make sure that there's a few measures among the 3 grand prize awardees that are going to be common. Now, those other organizations are not doing anything with nutrition, but there are things that relate to parents' relationship with their children, and there will be some collective measures. So I'm hoping to learn from that process and bring some ideas in terms of the food and nutrition work that we all do to maybe talk to the Department of Health as well as the Department of School Wellness and see what kind of common questions maybe once a year everybody's asking at the end of the school year so that we can compile data among all these different organizations.
That would be amazing.
So that's my dream.
And we had a final question that we're not going to have time for, but I just want to sum up what that is, which was mentioned before by everyone actually, is that it takes us all a lot of tries when we have new foods to decide that we like them. And one of the best things that is happening with all of this work is that it is having kids get to try new foods in schools in a low-stake environment among their peers to try them, that then for families that have limited resources, limited budgets, limited time, then know, oh yeah, if I make this zucchini at home, my kids are going to eat it. I'm going to do it. And that is such a wonderful thing that we are doing for today's children who will become tomorrow's adults that are going to face this incredibly challenging food supply that we have. We didn't even bring up that over 60% of our foods are what are called ultra-processed that are not supporting our health. And that's why we're doing all of this, so our kids can have different experiences and demand and know they have the power to change what food they have in the future. So thank you to Lynn, Miriam, and Yadi for an amazing conversation.
Thank you.
That was really, I think, inspirational, and it makes me want to go back to a classroom and learn, from all of you. And I think we all enjoy time in the kitchen, or many of us do anyway, or at least enjoy the eating part if we don't enjoy the cooking part, right? So, you know, in this city, we're really lucky. I mean, we have no shortage of innovative and hardworking nonprofits that are doing this amazing work, trying to teach kids healthy habits that will last a lifetime, right? Um, so part of what I really love to talk about is like, you know, who really should be responsible for funding nutrition and culinary education, right? I am a true believer, having had a background in politics and government. I believe in government. I believe in government's power to do good and to, you know, make us all, you know, to watch out for us, right? And so I'm hoping we can tease this out a little bit. We have Jeremy Walter here. We're going to, again, do the same template that Pam had with, you know, you guys will introduce yourselves, and then we'll go into some questions. So, Jeremy, if you want to take the lead on this, that'd be great.
Sure.
Thanks.
Hi, everyone. I'm Jeremy Walter with New York City Public Schools. I've been a staff member in the city here with the public school system for about 15 years. And currently, my role is a brand new one in the department, which is focused on food and climate education. It's the first time that we've had a team focused in these areas. And what's really interesting is that where I sit is within our teaching and learning and academic unit, right? So where in the past, and you know, I work really closely with our food service team, but they sit in the operational side of our massive school system, right? So the intention here was to seed this work alongside all of our other core academic areas, right? So reading and math and sciences and art, right? And health and PE, right? That food and nutrition and climate education, which we're not talking about today, but so it's definitely connected, are looked at as a core academic subject, right? And that they should be included alongside these other areas. So that's our goal and part of the work that I'm charged with in our public school system. A tiny bit of context on our school system for those who may not know. It is actually the largest school system in the country. If you can imagine, we have 50 or so million K-12 public school students in the United States. 1 million of them, 1 in every 50 public school student in the United States lives right here in New York City. It's hard to imagine, right? So our charge is vast and major. And so what we have to do is think about things at a really systemic and systematic level. And I loved what Chef Yadi was saying about really who has the voice and the power in the decision making here. And that's one of the things I'd love to talk about today is who we're trying to include in these conversations as we go. So nice to
That's
be here.
terrific. Thank you. Thanks so much. Pam.
Well, and obviously you've all just heard a lot from me, and I feel like I had so many things that came into my head that I want to say, and so I'm going to try to be very succinct. So I also believe that government can have a really, really great power, and that this is such an incredible way to make our future different. I want all of you to just close your eyes for a second and imagine that every person in New York City, but also around the world, had the food that would connect to their culture and nourish them, and have that every day. And then imagine all of the conflict and all of the problems and all of the challenges that we have. And just think that everyone would have a better capacity for handling that. And that's why we're continuing to do this work. So I came to Teachers College in 1992. And actually, at that point in time, we, Teachers College, had gotten money through actually a settlement that there was a milk company that had been overcharging New York City public schools a fraction of a penny for decades. When it finally got settled, it was millions of dollars that were owed to the city. So we were able to start something called the Nutrition Education Resources Project. And we turned that into something called Earth Friends that directly connected food and climate. So it was Earth Friends exploring the whole story of food that was started in the 70s, way before I was at Teachers College. And we had school kids coming to Teachers College every day when I first came there in the 90s, and it had been going on for a long time, to do things that were about 7 chapters of the whole story of food, which was how food is grown, transported, changed or processed, what makes food packaging, where we buy our foods and what are the options to do that and who has access, cooking and eating, and then what do we dispose and what can be reused. So things like composting, as well as then using washable plates instead of throwaway plates and recycling and stuff like that. We were doing that every day. We were really, really fortunate to have the Laurie M. Tisch give money to start the Laurie M. Tisch Center for Food Education and Policy, where I'm now the faculty director. And that was a little over a decade ago in 2013. I had spent a lot of time in schools up until that time, and I had done a lot of projects and a lot of research. What I realized is we at Teachers College would be able to expand this work more by not doing direct service anymore, by actually bringing together all of these groups that had existed for a long time, way, way, way before I was doing this work, and were continuing to grow to build the movement and make the case for why we need this kind of education and what it would take to get it to every single New York City school kid. So the fact that we have Jeremy here in teaching and learning in the Department of Education related to food and climate is a huge accomplishment and puts us in a better place to get this to all school kids than we have ever been. And yet, it's fragile because we know things can change. So it's going to take all of us continuing to cheer for this, build the power, see who has the power, change the power structures, and give kids and adults these experiences so everyone believes that's just a normal part of education.
Yeah, that's excellent. Yes. So, Jeremy, I want to go back to you in terms of your role, this new role that exists, and talk a little bit about what you've seen, what have been successes, what have been really the challenging bits of it, and what do you see as being a hopeful indicator for the future so that this work can be sustained beyond an administration, beyond the will in Washington and funding and all of that?
Yeah, and thanks, Pam. I appreciate that, and that was so inspirational. So we're really trying to come at this from kind of two big buckets on the instructional side. One is, yep, thank you. One is what my colleagues in the previous panels started to talk about a little bit with the experiential aspect, right, for our kids, right? Growing food, cooking food, learning about where their food comes from and going to see that in action. So those kinds of experiences coupled with classroom-based instruction across all subject areas, right? So we talk a lot in our downtown at City Hall and at Tweed, which is where the New York City Public Schools is housed, about building coherence for our teachers. And that really refers to an understanding about, like, if I'm teaching science, right, to a ninth grader, what are all the other things that ninth grader is learning about that I should be keeping in mind as I'm teaching science to that ninth grader so that they are having a holistic experience, so that they're not just thinking about science, but they're thinking about the connections to their math class or to their writing class or to their research and social studies classes. So we're talking about that a lot on our instructional teams so that, to Pam's point about really raising the bar for our teachers and providing professional learning, that we can create that coherence for them so that then a student will have this really robust, connected experience from the time they're in pre-K and having experiential opportunities in the classroom with Willow all the way up through high school when they're doing hydroponics and gardening outside and hopefully taking some cooking classes and things like that. So it's this two-pronged approach of instruction and teacher support so that we can really create a sustainable model across the city. We have 80,000 plus teachers, over 100,000 school staff. So if we can train even decent percentages of those teachers, they're the ones who are seeing these millions of kids every day, right? So if we can raise their capacity to provide this instruction, we're going to have a lot more will going forward. So those are the two kind of buckets of work we're focusing on. As far as successes and challenges, certainly we operate inside of a massive infrastructure here and a massive bureaucracy. And some basic things that, right, like people don't think about are, Pam started to mention earlier around like, are our schools built to sustain and create environments where kids can actually do cooking or where they can learn about growing. And in many of our schools, they're not designed for that, right? We have schools in our city that are on 20th floors of office buildings in Union Square. We've got schools of all shapes and sizes, right, across our city with different levels of resources. So how do we create, and this is why the coupling of programming and instruction is so key. There's always classroom space, right? So how can we create instructional models where teachers are actually providing this instruction without the need for induction burners, let's say, or even running water in their classroom? How can we create lesson plans for them to do that and support learning to take place while continuing to invest in infrastructure and policy changes so that cooking can happen in other parts of the school. One example of this, right, just really digging down into the granular here, schools have to actually pay in our city to use their own kitchen after school, right? So for instance, they don't get access, like it's a public building, right? So they have to pay for extra people, staff to be there. They have to pay for security and supplies. So we made it really easy for schools this year to not have to cover those costs. So we're at Central covering the costs for schools so that that's one less barrier to bring kids down into the kitchen and use the kitchen after school. Just an example, but for many years, this was a real barrier to entry for schools because they couldn't even get into their own kitchens. Another one was the use of induction burners in classrooms. We're working with facilities offices across the city because schools are in lots of different types of buildings to ensure that this is actually possible, right? So little things like that that we take for granted. We have 1,800 schools in about 1,600 buildings. And so, like I said, they take lots of different shapes and sizes to try to create a system that meets them all where they're at.
That's terrific. Yeah, no, and that's really, I think, helpful putting into perspective how vast a school system, you're part of, and thinking about, where I went to school in the Adirondacks, a K-12 at the time school, which had, I don't know, a few hundred students. And up the road, my mom taught at a school smaller than that, and for 28 years taught home economics. And she just went back to that school this week for a meeting, and her replacement in home economics has been there for 28 years.
Wow.
So they're still teaching, that method, and the kitchen is still the same, and it's, but, there's also a lot of space in the Adirondacks.
And sorry to add, the only thing, a massive thing that I failed to mention that we can get into in a little bit is I talked about the differences in school types across the city and how that impacts the learning of kids. Let's not forget the differences in our cultures that we're seeing in the communities that we're seeing across the city, right? Just the foods that kids are eating in East New York versus the South Bronx are very different, right? And so how do we create programming and instruction that meets each of them where they're at as well? So that's a whole nother topic that gets into the vastness of our system also.
Right, and making sure every student feels seen and heard in that space.
Yeah.
So we get the joy and the connection,
Amen.
right?
Yeah.
Pam, so when, you've been in this space a long time, and you've been coordinating these, education programs for years. So can you talk about these efforts and how you've seen that evolution take place? Highlighting, maybe areas where you think we can do more, and what you're hopeful about in terms of maybe the mapping side of this to see great outcomes in the future.
So first I want to share, when we were doing the cook shop program in the 1990s, we were using the coil kind of electric burners, and we were burning out fuses in schools all the time. And then we would move someplace else and burn out more fuses. And it was not fun to have many classrooms without electricity. We actually went, and I am like, I know this is being recorded, but we went to using portable butane burners and had open flames in schools. And like when I think about how the world has changed, we were very safe. Like we would put tables around, and I know what we were doing was safe, but it's kind of crazy to think
And we're
about
back to blowing out fuses with the induction
Yeah,
burners, so
yeah,
don't worry
yeah,
about
yeah.
that.
But you know
Well,
what?
yeah, Bunsen burners.
I think that one thing that's actually in our favor with that is that because there's more and more computers in schools, they are upgrading the electricity for other reasons that will make the induction burners hopefully work better. And then I just want to talk about one other thing before I talk about the mapping, because I think one of the things that Jeremy and I know I've talked a ton about is all of these great experiences, and then where nutrition fits into schools is in the health education curriculum that is very skills-based and really guiding students on how to make changes. And I just want to share one quick story of working with a middle school teacher who was actually a health teacher tasked with teaching science this year, and I was working in a science curriculum that we developed called Choice, Control, and Change that was a middle school science curriculum that was all about both eating more fruits and vegetables and the cultural connections of food, but also taking on a lot of that ultra-processed foods and what to eat less of as well. And the teacher, like I said, was a health teacher teaching this science curriculum. So it was a really great mix. And we did all these things like looking at how much sugar's in sweetened beverages and saying, you know what, there's more sugar in a 20-ounce bottle of any sweetened beverage than what is recommended that your body can have in a day. And if you want to do all the things that you want to do, whether that's sports or dancing or writing poetry or whatever it is, you're going to be better when you're eating the foods that nourish you. We had a student who, and maybe some of you have had a student like this, who was the resistor. Everything that we did would be like, you know, vegetables are gross. Why do you want kids to eat those? Yuck. And like, what? Why would we not want soda after school? It's so good and we're so thirsty and it's right in the store outside. Come on, you guys. Like, why would we ever do that? Just on and on and on. And this was a while ago, so before we all had these things that counted our steps. And we gave the kids pedometers. And we told them this was a scientific tool that they could count their steps. We gave them to them one day, had them test them out. The next morning I went in, and the student who was the resistor called me over and said, I'm going to show you something. And the student showed me the pedometer, and it had 4,000 steps. And this was 8 a.m. And I said, oh my gosh, how did you get 4,000 steps? And the student said, my friends and I decided to walk to school today, and it was fun, and I feel really good. And after that, that student became the leader in the skills-based process that the health education teacher was doing and was the one giving suggestions. You know, maybe you could bring a water bottle instead of buying that soda after school. Or maybe we should look at what's on the salad bar today because it is good to have vegetables. And so it just took that spark, even for a student that was like, oh, come on, why are we doing this? That made the huge difference. So now, on to what your question was, which is, I have seen the growth of the programs that are doing this work, as well as teachers who, despite everything else that they have to do, are incredibly committed to this food education because they see the difference. They see what foods their kids are coming into school with. They see how the food environment has changed for today's children, even compared to some of our younger teachers, how the food environment was, and what it is that it's going to take to have kids be able to navigate through this crazy food environment, as well as to be the advocates for change, that I think that we can use that momentum. And just to share a couple of things, when we mapped out where these programs were several years ago, we found a couple of things. One, that elementary schools had a lot more of the programs that were coming in than middle schools, and middle schools had a lot more than high schools. That had some programs shift to be able to basically move more towards middle and high school students. We also found one borough, which is a very important borough, Staten Island. I have no connections to Staten Island, but was not getting any education because they weren't connected by the subway. We had one organization that then actually had vans picking up nutrition educators in Brooklyn to bring them to Staten Island to go to the schools there to make that happen. We also realized that there was many, many small organizations And two organizations, one that some of you may remember called Bubble, ended up merging with Edible Schoolyard so that they could build their capacity, so that they could reach together as a unit, reach more students. And so what it shows is that when we have this coordination and are able to see it as a movement, and each individual organization keeps their identity, is doing what they're doing, the passion that they bring to it is still there, and we see ourselves as a movement, and we can look at and figure out what we need to do to get this expanded to all of our kids, that's when we can make it work.
That's right. That's great. Yep. I'm going to stick with you, Pam, on this one. So, with your work, throughout the city, and I know you've made trips to Albany, to advocate for legislation to advance nutrition education. So, can you share a bit about that experience and some key takeaways? Like, why is that important? Why do we need to even do that? Come up with fact sheets and distribute and call, set up things to call your council member, and why do we need to do that?
So first of all, we put a lot on our schools. There was about a decade ago, the Institute of Medicine and the United States Department of Agriculture had a meeting that was, should we have food and nutrition education standards for the country? And it was a mixture of educators and food and nutrition education people. And the educators that were there had quote unquote drunk the carrot juice or whatever you want to say. Like they were into food and nutrition education, but they also knew the reality of schools. And what one of them showed were these slides that were incredibly impactful. It started from, and this was in the 2010s, started from I think like 1900 or 1910, and had every decade and said, here's what we want schools to do because these are important for children that are outside of reading, writing, and arithmetic, right? And what happened is every decade, the list font size got smaller and smaller because what was asked of schools was more and more. Even when elevators were new, it was like elevator education, so kids were safe in elevators, right? Like everything is put onto schools. So we all believe that this is important, but if you are an administrator in running schools, you're like, yeah, food and nutrition education is important, and mental health is important, and blah, 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 on and on and on and on. And so what we need to do is be able to show that when we have this food and nutrition education, it is actually going to also help with so many other issues. When we were working on what was called the WELL campaign, which was wellness, equity, learning legislation, what we were doing was showing the connection between mental health and food and how it went both ways. Basically, when we are eating well, we can actually then help with supporting students that are having mental health issues because they are better going to be able to take on any of the work that they're going to. Is it going to, is eating well, does it solve depression and anxiety? No. Does it help someone who is having issues be able to have whatever kind of therapy or medication they're having, have it work better? Absolutely. And so we could show those connections and show that this isn't just a thing by itself, it connects to everything else. And when we were doing that, that's when we brought in the legislators and everyone said, this is important because it helps with all of these other issues as well. It's not just one more thing to add on to schools.
Can I jump in on that for a second? So one thing that's making me think about, Pam, is one challenge area we have in our school system, which is we ask so much of our schools, and one of the areas that we simply cannot ask our school system to take on is a lot of adult education for our staff, right? So we, with 100,000 plus staff members as a system, have almost no ability to invest in the wellness of those people. So what does that lead to in our schools is a lack of modeling, right? And for all of us who've been in education, right, without modeling, education can't go as far as it should be going or as it could go, right? So this is a big, I don't know the right term, but, a big challenge area for me and something I really struggle with and something I'll put out for all of you in the community to think about is where can we support our educators to learn more about this outside of schools? Because in a school building, during a school day, there's not the time or resources or capacity to help our teachers and our school staff learn more about their own wellness. Their own wellness, sorry, very sorry. Their own wellness and their own eating habits and their own connections to food. And what that leads to is a disconnect between the instruction and the modeling and the experiences that our kids are having. And so it's just something that I see as a big gap area that we need to come up with, whether it's with our labor unions or with other organizations out there.
Can I just add on
Yeah,
one quick
yes,
thing?
of course.
Sorry. We're going back and forth here. My son, who's now actually in graduate school, when he was in high school, the Office of Sustainability in the Department of Education had a program where they were giving kids Swell water bottles, which was an amazing, amazing program. And the school took on giving them water bottles, making sure the water fountains were working well in the school so the kids could fill them, and education about why not to drink sweetened beverages. So the kids, it stuck. The kids were all bringing these water bottles in. And the teachers were still bringing in sweetened beverages. And what ended up happening is the teacher said, you know what, we're so happy you're learning this because we're addicted, and they use that word, addicted to these. And we don't want you to have the same. So we are happy that you guys, the students, are drinking water. And my son, who grew up with me as a mom, like didn't always appreciate it all and was like, oh, what are you keeping me from eating? But like said, you know what? I'm seeing now that it can actually make a real difference to have both the nice bottles, the water to fill them, and know the reasons why not having those sweetened beverages is important.
That's right. And I think, we had a pilot project here this semester that involved 2 vending machines. I've talked to you guys both about this, but, and the vending machines have been retrofitted to serve as food pantries for our students here. And, there's a lot of food insecurity with college students across the country, but it's 40% here in New York City. That's a big number. So our pilot, we wanted to include really healthful food options for these students. Some of them are, our parents themselves. They're in graduate programs here in nutrition or public health. And so, we got to choose, to talk to your procurement issue, Yadi, we got to choose product from farmers and producers in New York State, but we got to choose BIPOC farmers if we wanted to from Grow NYC, making those selections, or women-owned farms, and other products that were good, right? I didn't think that was going to be enough because I said, a lot of people don't know how to cook, right? So, and even though they may be in their 20s or 30s when they're here, it was like, I called on our friend Gila, who runs the food lab, and I said, do you think we can use the kitchen? And do you think we can do a test run of classes there? And what we did also was to invite any staff that were here who wanted to come. And at the end of those classes, whether we were talking about food waste, repurposing leftovers, how to plan a menu, shop on a budget, all those things with an eye towards cultural relevancy, we would hand out bags of the whatever we were cooking with during that class, so they could take it home and try it at home. And, it was received really well. I mean, the problem is it's a pilot and we've got to raise money to keep that program going. But I think, to your point, Jeremy, it's like we can't forget the adults. And while, yes, we need to get everybody when they're young because we know that's going to have the greatest impact for everyone. But I think, in these days, we've got to also take a look at any way we can reach adults. Where I was living in Harlem on 120th, we would have cooking classes during the pandemic on the street. And it wasn't just for the kids. I mean, everybody showed up. So I think, there's a lot we can do on a community level, right, to get people engaged and interested in that too. So I really appreciate the shout out to us older adults who need some help sometimes too. So, so Jeremy, I'm going to just hit on this home economics thing because my mother, also Pam, every night, every meal, the vitamins, the minerals that we were eating and why we were eating this stuff. And not to mention the fact that many times it was venison or pig's knuckles or whatever Eastern European thing she was cooking that evening. But anyway, we learned about it. But so has there been talk on the level of the school level about, I know space is an issue, but bringing back, for high school students or middle school students, a home economics or home and careers or family and consumer sciences, I think is the latest iteration, right? So, and, we do teach it still. You can still get a major in that, right? Queens College, right? Don't they have, I think? I don't know. Anyway, take that away.
Yeah, it's a great question. I think whenever people ask about subjects and introducing or bringing back subjects or introducing new subjects into the school day, my mind always goes to a clock and time. And to Pam's point about how much we're asking of our schools these days, time is a major issue for our schools. We currently have some pretty major hills to climb with regard to our literacy and our math with our young kids, even with our middle schoolers and some of our secondary school kids. And there's a lot of advocacy around those subjects. So what it leads to is a lot of pressure on the other subject areas, even some that we think of as those core subjects that aren't going anywhere, like the sciences and things like that. We're now hearing from science teachers across the city that, and others, social studies, civics, that their time is being squeezed, right? So even their ability to get through their entire curriculum and their scope and sequence of what they're trying to achieve in a school year is very hard for them. And so when we get asked about questions about, additional topics, even like art, right, which has a massive advocacy, right? There's a lot of people interested in art. We're seeing schools that are now deprioritizing the arts because they need to focus on these literacy and math subjects so much. So it is hard to imagine these subjects coming back. But what I would say is that we have two things going for us. One is we have a mayor's office on food policy that's really interested in pushing more on the culinary side and the nutrition, education, and instruction side. And so at the secondary level especially, we're seeing a lot more support for our culinary education programs. So what I think we will see is more specialized programs within the high schools building up over the next few years. Where that leaves us a little bit is in the middle school level with getting kids excited about things early. And so I think that's where some of our programs and extracurricular activities can be really helpful. So we've got some great organizations, some of whom are here today, that really work on this idea of how do we get kids excited about cooking and working with food. One of my colleagues earlier mentioned, like, I have literally never seen a kid grow something, even if it's lettuce, and not be willing to just taste it. We have hydroponics labs in the city where kids are just stopping by between classes and grabbing lettuce off the grow towers and just pop it in their mouth. Like, this is what we're trying to build. And so I think it can be interwoven into our other classes and subjects because I'm unfortunately not so sure we're going to see the time to be able to have its own standalone topic. As someone who's a former cook and worked in restaurants a long time and grew up in the kitchen with my mom, I would also love to see it, but I'm not. It's not something I'm feeling super kind of hopeful that there's a big push for that coming back.
I hear you. Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
No, thanks for that
Yeah.
thoughtful response. Okay, so I think, Pam, if you could speak a little bit to like progressive policies that exist maybe in other cities or across the country or maybe even globally that you've seen or read about or experienced, and what could we bring or could we learn here in New York City from some of those places or spaces?
So I'm going to start with Japan. And in 2005, Japan as a country passed a food education bill. And that meant that they were going to focus on children having really great experiences learning about food and then really great school lunch experiences. I've only been to Japan once, and it was 4 days to get to learn about all of this, so I don't know a lot, but I know some. And I want to acknowledge that anything that we know about Japanese culture and U.S. culture. U.S. culture, our identity is on individualism, and the Japanese culture, the identity is really on collectivism and working together. So, you know, appreciating that difference. When I went into schools, first of all, every school had the equivalent of a home economics room. It was just part of a school. Just like we would not imagine a school here without a gymnasium, there was a food education room in every school. And so, yeah, a lot of schools don't have gymnasiums. My kids went to schools that didn't have it too. So, like, okay, that was a bad example. But, like, it was in every single school. And were they, like, the absolute most gorgeous cooking room that you could imagine? Some of them were. Some of them that I saw were pretty basic, and they were there. Also, community centers, which there was a lot of, had shared cooking spaces where people could come and have cooking programs. So that connected it between the school and the community as well. Then the way that they do school meals there, and there's a video that was made by Alexis, who is an NYU student I could share and you could send out to everyone. The way that they do meals there is they have some really, really large kitchens that were completely impressive, that were cooking food, you know, just large amounts for a whole city. But then they actually get it down to the classroom level. So in these large facilities, they were literally putting the food in pans, had how many kids were in each class, weighing out the food for that. And the food gets delivered to the classroom. And then students on a rotating basis serve their peers. And it is absolutely beautiful to watch. And then when they all get their food, they sit down and they eat in the classroom, not in a cafeteria. They sit down and they do a thank you to the farmers who grew the food, to the people who prepared the food, and to the students who served the food. So they are grounding it in what, you know, that you should be appreciative of this, gratitude. So it seems like a little bit like grace, but it's not religious in any form. And then the kids sit and eat. They also are very much learning English, and they connect the English to the food education. So that was what I could understand. And so they were all talking about going over what the names of the foods were in English. And then they sit and eat together. I've spent a lot of time, and my colleague, Rainika Trent, who's in the audience, we've spent a lot of time in cafeterias, and there's a lot of food that doesn't get eaten in our cafeterias today. The amount of waste in the classrooms that I was in, you could basically probably put in a few of these glasses, which was very little. The kids ate the food. The other is they didn't really have any other food at any other part of the day. There's a lot of food that ends up, like what I found different between my kids and when I was growing up is food is now everywhere and served at every activity that kids go to. But so they came to lunch hungry and they ate the meal. I also want to share that here in New York City, Teachers College, where I work, has a Teachers College community school. And it's a public school. And the lead chef there, her name is Mary. She is a dynamo. And all of the kids say when they're going to lunch, we're going to get Miss Mary's lunch. How beautiful just to have a person that is making that meal for you. And that makes that kind of connection. I also, can I share one more thing? Okay, I also want to share, and I just named Rainika, is we have a grant, you know, and this built up from my work, which was doing a lot of education, working with the organizations, a grant from the NIH called Crunch Lunch, that we're just starting, but hopefully all of you will get to learn about it, which stands for Creating Resources, Uplifting Nutrition, Culture, and Health at Lunch. And what we are doing is putting together resources, so all kinds of food education lessons that will be on a hub that teachers can get to from all the organizations that are in the room and many others, books about food that teachers can read and a description of those, and then we're creating micro activities that teachers can do just before or after lunch that connect to STEM education and get the kids excited about eating lunch and talking about lunch. So that way, it's connected to the rest of the school day. And I think that can bring us closer to what I saw in Japan.
I love that. That's really spectacular. And I love this project you're working on. I think we'll be following that for a long time. Jeremy, well, actually, I'm going to go to a question to both of you. What area or focus are you most optimistic about in the educational space? And I'm going to tie this to the upcoming election, the 2024 election. And what changes might we realize in the policy realm on the national stage? And good or bad, what do you think's coming down the pike?
I think the fact that we're all talking about this and it is happening, and we have more and more children that are going home with those experiences. I happen to have people that are interested in food just somehow find their way to me, and there are more and more parents and teachers that want this and are speaking out for it. And unfortunately, it had to get to a place where we have clear climate issues with the way that we are producing our food that are going to affect what we will be able to grow in the future, and we are facing that. And that 85% of our healthcare costs are from diet-related diseases. So it's too bad that it had to get to that point. But I believe that that is going to have us be at a tipping point where we can no longer say that this is optional and we have to make it. And I think that that's what I'm optimistic about, that is going to build the momentum.
Great. And 2024?
2024, I don't even know where to go with that.
Let's talk about that.
I think we all have to vote. We have to vote with our consciousness and believe that government works and government works for us, and make the choices that we think are going to have a government that is going to care for each of us as a person.
Thank you. I like that.
Yeah, I can go next. I'll start with the election one, which is I think our next mayoral election is going to be more important for this work, particularly, than our federal elections will be. I think that as I shared earlier, we currently have a mayor for whom this is like one of his major life goals and visions, right? If he doesn't leave this city with a better place, leaving in a better place from a food perspective, he really feels strongly about that. And so he's equipped his staff with and built out a massive team that's focused on this. So I think if they're able to continue for another term, we will all be in a better place. And I'm not even, this is a non-political,
Right.
this is apolitical. This is just from an interest level, and to Pam's point, we're getting more interest in this topic. My role being created as being one example of that, us being in this room and more people being interested in this than ever. And I think that will continue if we have some of the same, some stability at least.
So you went to 2025.
So I went to 2025. I skipped 2024.
That's okay.
and-
That's okay. But I also think we need to call on, the generations coming up through.
So
And right?
yeah,
I mean, we need not just to vote, because we all should be doing that, right?
Yep.
I mean, I hitchhiked to vote my first time when I was 18 because I
Nice.
had registered in a place that I thought I was voting and it wasn't. But anyway, but I had to vote. I mean, it was just that simple. And it's like, but I have met so many, like even just in this role that I currently have, so many really bright people who care about this work. And we need you guys to run for office. We need you to step up. And most of them are like, well, I don't get political. But you have to. And holding the people that are running for office accountable, having this be on their platform. And as you mentioned rightly, our mayor has had this on his platform, and one of the few who has come forward to have it be so important, right?
Yeah. One thing to your question earlier about something I'm hopeful for, and connected to what you were just saying. No. The thing I'm hopeful for is that when I'm out in schools, and one of the reasons I believe that this can work is that our kids, from very young ages, this is what they want to talk about, right? So one of the reasons why we're doing a lot of focus in our work with our civics team and our social studies team is because when we ask them, like, what do you want to advocate for? This is the thing. This and climate are the two areas that our kids are by far the most health and wellness, and the climate are by far mental, all aspects of wellness and health are on the top of our kids' minds. And so we can capitalize on that and provide more support to build them as advocates, right? So that when our preschoolers are taking Nibble with Willow, and then our middle schoolers have WITS and all of this stuff, by the time they're in high school, right, and then they're studying with you guys here and at Columbia, they're going to be built for advocacy and for change making. So.
Love it. That's a terrific way to sum this all up. And I think we've kind of hit our time, everybody, but I can't thank you enough for coming. I'm going to read off some thank yous because I have to. These things don't happen on their own. So many people came together. Pam, it started with a conversation with you, and then everybody else who's been, part of these panels, Yadi, Lynn, Marion, Jeremy, and you are like the super moderator and panelist, Pam. Also, I'd like to thank Saratoga Water and Eterra Kitchen. And for those who don't know, right across the street from us, there's a shared kitchen space that houses about 40 to 50 food entrepreneurs, and they only started a couple years ago, and they do amazing work. And part of the food that we have in our pantry downstairs is from Eterra Kitchen, so the wraps, the salads, the soups, really delicious. A special thanks to Gila, who manages the food lab here and who always pitches in whenever I ask, and I ask a lot. Our public safety facilities and tech staff, Ali and St. Elmo, your crew, and Donnell. Everybody always steps up, even at the early hours in the morning. Casey, you have been like amazing. He hasn't even been here 2 months, and he basically could run the show, and may need to. And then Anna, Hafsa, Prisha, Valerie, and Nicole, all these wonderful interns and helpers we've had, we wouldn't be here. On our website, whoops, did I turn that off? I did not. You'll find our neighborhood food resource guides. I just point them out because we do update them with our interns each and every semester. They are for the 59 community districts that exist all throughout New York City. They show people in their neighborhood where to go for their food pantry, sign up for SNAP. What are the hours of their local deli? Do they have hours for older adults? That sort of thing. So yeah, go to our website, nycfoodpolicy.org. And if you don't already receive it, sign up for our weekly newsletter. It's free Wednesday mornings. It comes out. It has original content and aggregated content that spans climate, ag, and food, of course, New York City and beyond. And then, we're going to be celebrating our 40 Under 40 next month. This is a fun award season that we have, and we also honor changemakers. The mayor received our Changemaker Award last year, and then we also honor someone in the media space. So we'll be, all that information, you'll be able to read about all the winners soon, and they're a great group this year, I think. So anyway, thank you all for coming. We're going to do a picture of our great panelists, and then if you all would like to take a trip down to the basement level and see our food pantry, Casey is willing. He's at the back, green and white shirt. Is that green and white? Yes. And we'll be happy to have you guys take a little tour of what we've got going on downstairs. And Gila, if you want to go along and show the food lab, I think it's like, I love kitchens, and it's a really great space. Anyway, thank you all.